Hey guys, this week on the podcast, just in time for Halloween, I am doing a horror story. It is by one of the best authors of the horror genre, and it was his debut novel into the genre. It is a story of school children and hormones and bullying and telekinesis, and if you haven't guessed it yet, it is Stephen King's Carrie. So hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a novel review. My name is Seamus, I'm the host. If this is your first time joining us, then it's a book podcast, so I do what it says on the tin. Every week I discuss a new book. And if you are a repeat customer, thank you so much for coming back. I really do appreciate it. Just on that, I do a different book every week and I'm always looking for new books, great books. The last few weeks I have been calling for you guys, the listeners, to tell me some books that you might like me to do. And I think the reception of that has been great. And I've been given a lovely growing list of books. I've managed to find some of them, not all of them. Of course, I'll be able to read some of them, not all of them. But please, if there is a book that you have in mind, please throw it out there. I'd love to add it to the list. It always helps. Put them in the comments or send me something on social media or an email. Putting in the comments, I think, is good, especially for YouTube, because then everyone else can see them as well. And then there's sort of like a nice little collection of books that might introduce someone else to the book as well. So that's really great. I said this, I think it was last week, the best and worst thing about a book podcast is you actually have to read the books. And so I get all these wonderful book recommendations, but of course it takes time to, one, source the book, because I always try to get it secondhand first. And then, of course, read the book, because that does take the majority of the book podcast. That is the majority of the work. That's where majority of the work goes in. It's actually just reading the book to do the episode. So that's the best and worst thing, is there's always great books out there and there's always another great book waiting to be read. But of course, you've then got to read the book, which can take some time. So if you have recommended a book, please stay patient. I will hopefully get to them. I'm definitely going to do my best, but obviously I've got my own reading interests. I'm getting off track now, blah, blah, blah. Throw it out there and I'll absolutely do my best to read it. Now, normally I do a mantelpiece moment, which is a chance to highlight something from the week past. I normally try to keep it sort of like literary or arty or something like that, just to sort of say, look, I did this, it's kind of cool. I went to this theatre play, or I did this, blah, blah, blah. This week I was sick though, so I've actually done pretty much nothing. It's not pretty much nothing, I've done nothing. So I've got nothing to really report on that. So I thought I'd just take this opportunity to say thank you for listening. Thank you for following. If you would like to follow, click the duck in the corner. It's fantastic. If you are listening to this through your headphones, because it's a podcast and you're not watching it on YouTube, thank you so much. If you want to chuck 5 stars on there, I would really appreciate it. But I've said this once, I'll say it a million times. It's a free podcast, so just enjoy it. There's no pressure for anything. I simply hope you enjoy it. But basically the point of all that was just to say thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you guys. Without you guys, I'm just a guy sitting in a room recording himself talking to absolutely nobody, which does actually sound quite sad. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all of you. You're incredible. I have a lot of fun doing this. I have a lot of fun seeing the comments, reading the comments, hearing your points on points that I've made. Hearing your book recommendations, they're fantastic. But yeah, I have a lot of fun doing it, and so thank you so much to you guys. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's get on to the main body of the episode. Carrie by Stephen King. This was the first novel he wrote, and funnily enough, for me, this was the first novel of his I'd read, which is, I think, quite nice, because I bought another book the other day, Misery by Stephen King, and he's got a long list of books that he has written, and he does have a bit of a cult following in that people seem to really, really love him. And I mean, you wouldn't be that successful if people didn't love you, so that's always a good sign. And I think it's really nice then when you come into an author like this where he's read, it must have been excess of 30, 40 books, maybe even more, that you almost start with the first one, because that's often I'm not going to say the worst one, but it's just a great place to start because, as you write more, your skills develop more, you understand, your own voice more, the structure of novels more, how to tell stories better and all this stuff. So you're naturally, hopefully going to get better as you go on and on and on. So starting with the first one was quite nice. It was a great place to start. It was a very interesting story, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I think I might do an overview first for those that haven't read it. Carrie is the story of a young teenage girl. I believe she's 16. She has an incredibly religious mother that is a bit too religious to the point that she does sort of torture Carrie for her sinful behavior, which between you and me is not sinful at all. It's pretty much just trying to exist in the world. And Carrie realizes quite early, and this isn't a spoiler because you realize as well as the reader because it's told to you quite early in the novel that she has telekinetic powers, which I think is important to touch on that early, but I'll come back to that later. And basically, Carrie is, because of her mother and this highly religious lifestyle she leads, she's quite secluded from the public sort of life. She's not a very sociable character. And so at school, she gets bullied quite badly because of this. And it's sort of a cautionary tale about bullying and what that can lead to. And throughout the whole book, there's sort of the main narrative of Carrie sort of trying to exist in this world as a bullied individual. And there's also a sub-narrative that's epistolary through letters and news articles and books and stuff like this about something that goes wrong on prom night. And so the whole time you're building to what prom night is going to be in Carrie's story, and you're getting sort of a reflective nature of what prom night was. And it doesn't reveal what actually happened, but as the book goes on, you start to realize what's going to happen, and it's not good at all. And so that's kind of what the story is about. It's about following this girl in this incredibly difficult period where she's intensely bullied and trying to figure out what that means and how she exists in it, while also understanding that something does go very wrong. And I mean, it's safe to assume that her telekinetic powers are probably going to come into it. So I think that was a very long, short overview of the story. I pretty much just told the entire storyline of the book, but I think this is a pretty well-known book in terms of pop culture. It was pretty popular. I think it's had 2 pretty solid films made about it now. I'm sure lots of people have opinions that the first one was probably better, but I've never seen either of them, so I don't know. What did I think of this book? I'm going to start this by saying I actually listened to this book, and being my first Stephen King novel, I didn't know what to expect in terms of storytelling and structure and all these different things. And so when I started listening to it, I was initially a bit confused by what was actually going on. I didn't know it was going to be a story about a girl with telekinetic powers. I of course knew that Stephen King is quite good in the horror genre. And I've seen, what did I watch? I say recently, it was probably years ago now, The Shining. That's of course about, not necessarily telekinetic powers, but it is about sort of the supernatural and the supernatural world intermixing with the regular world. So I knew that it wasn't like a foreign concept to me, but I didn't expect it or understand that it was going to be in this book. And so when the narrator started talking, started telling me the story, it started off really nicely in the Carrie story, but then all of a sudden jumping back to the epistolary, which is of course happening post Carrie story. It's kind of difficult to link up what's going on, and because in an audiobook you don't really get those breaks that you get on a page where you might have to flip the page to start a new chapter. You don't really sometimes recognize that we're actually in a different timeline, time zone, completely different story now. And I found that kind of really difficult at the start. And I don't know why I found it difficult, but I just found it difficult in the start to sort of catch on what was actually going on. That's not a slight on the narrator. I thought she actually did a really nice job. She had a really nice voice, and she carried the book quite nicely. And once I sort of understood what was going on, it became quite easy to understand. But it is one of those things that make me think, would this have been a better book to have read the first time than listened? Because there are some books that I genuinely think are fantastic for an audiobook, but I'm not sold for this one. I'm not sure it was a great audiobook in terms of it being an audiobook to a book. Nothing to do with the narrator herself, because I thought she was actually really nice. But that was sort of my view, in that it's a story about telekinetic powers. Now, you find this out quite early, which I thought was interesting, because it's almost like it takes the spoiler away from what it's building to throughout this whole story. But then I was kind of thinking, And I don't know this. This is just what I was thinking. I think he might have done it on purpose because it is a cautionary tale about bullying and bullying going on in a school, and that school is in America. And I guess when you read a story like this, especially as someone that's not from America, you read a story about someone being intensely bullied and alienated in a school, and you know something bad happens at the end at prom where there's a large group of people gathered. I think my mind would have naturally gone to something like a school shooting, which I don't think that's an unreasonable point of view to have, but having the fact that it's telekinetic powers throughout the whole story, I think sort of manages that expectation, and it's not going to be that. But I also think these are interesting genres for people to jump into. Like, I don't think many people like or enjoy supernatural stories as opposed to just regular stories. I don't think, sci-fi and fantasy have great fan bases, but they're often quite siloed, and a lot of people love to just read sci-fi and fantasy, and a lot of people would never read sci-fi fantasy. So I think if you had a story where it's about this girl and it's not revealed that she has telekinetic powers, and it's about this girl going through this intensely bullying story leading to something bad, and then at the end you're like, but she had telekinetic powers and something bad happened, you as the reader might be like, wait, what? That was not alluded to at all. That came out of nowhere. That makes no sense. Like, why would you just insert a supernatural sort of ending into a regular story? So I think having the fact that Carrie is supernatural and does have these telekinetic powers, establishing that at the start of the story is actually incredibly important to manage the expectation for the story, but to also build a different kind of suspense in the story itself. And I think that for me is where there's almost two kinds of horror in this story, because there's the horror, of course, where we know we're building to something bad and she uses her telekinetic powers, and that's a horror in itself. Like, the idea of someone being in society with telekinetic powers is quite frightening. Being able to do things and bend certain things to their will is like a frightening concept. And so I think that's kind of like one layer of horror. But of course, another layer of horror is just kind of like the social layer of horror, where we know something bad happens at the end and Carrie's to blame. But because of that, we get to follow this storyline of a girl being intensely bullied and sort of building to that breaking point. And that's kind of like the more intense horror in this book. I think it's the unfortunate tracing of a girl as she undergoes this and wondering what could have been done different, if teachers had reached out better or recognized things better, if children, were perhaps educated better to understand what bullying can do and can amount to, they wouldn't have done this. And so it's kind of like, it's much more frightening for that level, because it does feel quite real in that sense, even though it's a story about telekinesis and it's a horror story. It does have that real element to it where it's, these kids don't really understand what they're doing because they're 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and they don't understand the concept of the larger world and sort of what that means and the effect of their actions on a greater scale. And so it's really, really frightening for that level. But I guess there's almost a third level as well as horror. It's Carrie's mum being this intensely religious character. And, I don't think there's anything wrong. I've got no issue with people being religious, but it's kind of that religious to a fault where she used to lock Carrie in a I think it was like a broom cupboard, very Harry Potterish, in a broom cupboard for sinning and for yelling and for doing these things that are immoral, that often weren't immoral at all. I think once, what were some of them? The mum and Carrie would get into a fight, and then Carrie would be locked in the cupboard for a few hours, begging and crying to come out. She needs to go to the bathroom. She's hungry. She's tired. She's stressed, and she'd just be locked in a cupboard for hours and on end. And the mum would just sort of be there like she's absolving her sins, like this is what needs to happen, this is God's will. And it's kind of like that religious to a fault where you're actually inflicting a great amount of damage upon the world. But I did really think the relationship between Carrie and her mum was really interesting, because even though her mum is incredibly religious to a fault, she does say that the boys and girls at school want to hurt you for being different. They're incredibly wicked characters. They're full of sin. They're full of lust. They're really bad, really wicked characters. And Carrie ignores that. Carrie hates it. She discovers she sort of has this power, this telekinetic power, and goes against her mum and decides to go to the school prom after she's asked. And the almost comical thing is, and I won't spoil what the sort of, what actually happens at prom, but the mum is proven right. And it turns out these children are quite horrible. Individually, it's tough to say whether they're all horrible or whether it's kind of like a herd mentality going on. There are a few lines that imply that it is perhaps a herd mentality, but I did find it really interesting that the mum is technically proven right. But Carrie still goes back to her mum and some stuff happens. I won't spoil what happens there. But basically it comes down to this kind of idea that I got the sense that Carrie was pretty much like, look, mum, you were right about this, but it's unfair that you get to be right about something that I need to experience myself. I need to go out into the world and to experience this myself and learn that people are bad. I can't sit at home and have you telling me the world is bad. I actually need to go out and experience it for myself, which I think is an incredibly important aspect to have. Now, this is an incredibly, I'm going to say quite short novel. I don't know how many pages it was, but it was about 6 hours on the audiobooks. That's quite short in terms of audiobooks, and I'm assuming that must be 150, maybe 200 pages of a book. And I think if there was one thing I would have liked more of, it was a bit more interaction with Carrie herself with some of these students. I think that would have, I guess, rounded it out a bit more, because Carrie did feel, I'm about to say isolated, but that's kind of like the point of the novel. But I think just a bit more interaction with her, a few more conversations here and there, might have just rounded out some of the side characters a bit more. Not necessarily Carrie. I thought Carrie was quite a well thought out character and I quite enjoyed her. But more for the benefit of these side characters, I would have liked to see them interact with Carrie in that way. That would probably be my only, I guess, criticism, if that's a criticism. The setting for the book, Maine, Chamberlain, Maine, America. And I don't know if this is just because I'm not American and I've never been to America and I've been sold on kind of like a Hollywood idealism, but there's something so fun about a supernatural story like this, a story about telekinesis, telekinetic powers, something so wonderful about it being taken place in America. It just seems like the kind of place where it does really feel possible. Like, I think, and maybe it's just because I'm not from there that it seems more believable, because if someone wrote an area from a story like this from an area I was from in Australia, I'd be like, that's not going to happen in Australia. Like, I know that area. That's obviously not going to happen there. I know the area. I've met the people. No one there has supernatural powers. So there's something really fun about these kind of stories being set in America that I really quite enjoy. I had a lot of fun reading this, or listening to it, as I should say. I thought it was a great little horror story to read for Halloween this year. Happy Halloween, everyone. And like I said last week, it's popping my Stephen King cherry, and he's got a long list of books that look an incredible amount of fun. And I mean, I've got Misery sitting there on the shelf. That looks like a sick story. I can't wait to get into that. But I can't wait to get into some of the bigger ones and possibly the fantasy works of his, the Dark Tower works. So all in all, I had a great time. I think I would rate this in terms of horror stories. In terms of stories, it's a fantastic debut novel. I think you've almost got to rate it on that rather than as a baseline horror story. I think maybe a 3.8 out of 5 is a fair mark. So what am I reading this week? This week I am reading Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. I finished a few books this week, and so I thought it's a great opportunity before I jump into my next fiction story to just spend a couple of days reading some non-fiction, because that's always fun. You don't want to do too much of it, of course, because you can get bogged down, not in the fact that it's boring, but sometimes there's just a lot of information to take on. That's the beauty of non-fiction. You can kind of jump in and out as you please. And I mean, this is a great book, A Brief History of Humankind. It seems really good. It was very well received. He has just actually released another book. I think it's called Nexus, and it's all about AI, which is quite a big topic at the moment. You know, a lot of people have a bit of anxiety about AI and its place in the world, and then their place in the world as a result of AI. So that could be pretty interesting. I might look at getting that soon, perhaps. We shall see. But for now, just reading some Sapiens, learning about us, having a good time. So yeah. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. Also, feel free to head along to the website and support the pod in other ways. Like and subscribe, click the 5 stars. I absolutely love it, and I love you guys. Thank you so much. So I think it's time to end this episode. And today, to take us away, I think a quote from Sapiens itself. And this, little frightening quote, I guess. Having so recently been one of the underdogs of the savannah, we are full of fears and anxieties over our position, which makes us doubly cruel and dangerous.